You're going to give me the... We're on. And we're back. Welcome back to the Cirrus Pilots and Owners Health and Nutrition Forum. I hope you enjoyed yesterday. We're going to edit yesterday's video a little bit. I know there was some blank screen at the beginning there for 40 minutes, but if you just fast forward 40 minutes, you'll get into the beginning of it. And then a little later today, we're going to be having, for those of you who are thinking of coming next year, we got an amazing Mexican brunch with handmade tortillas and street tortillas, just everything but the carne asada, I guess. Jim Benny's with me here again this morning. He'll be available for Q&A if there's any follow-up from yesterday. But mostly today, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Glacken, who's going to introduce Ray, who we're just so happy took time out of what I've heard is an incredibly busy schedule the last couple of weeks to spend a little time with us, talk about flying and keeping our medical, and then open up for some questions. Jim.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pierre, and thank you, Dr. Benny, for joining us this morning. And yeah, so with Ray's a good friend of mine. I met him a couple years ago. We were actually at a animal rights gala.
Yeah, right. I got drugged to a animal rights gala.
On my crappy vegan diet all night, actually, and the results were within Ray? I think in 7 days I lost about 8 pounds just following your advice. And Ray is one of those guys. He's a NASA geek. Spent most of his career in NASA developing rockets and stuff like that. Truly a rocket scientist. Entrepreneur. I think it was Zero G, right, that you created. So you've gone from weightlessness to weight loss, and so Ray has got an incredible amount of passion. It'll be interesting to see how many of you can keep up with him. The mind works incredibly fast, but we're honored to have you, Ray. I know you've been incredible.
Thank you.
Publishing books and studies and papers and traveling. You were just in Thailand doing an event there, and now you're back in the States and you're on a deadline. So we really appreciate your time, investment of time today, and appreciate your expertise and wisdom that you're going to share with us.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, so I'd like to start by backing up and the reason why, Jim, when you guys call me and ask about doing this, it's so important to me, is that aviation's been a part of my whole life. I did not go to school or dream or anything of being a diet guru. This is like the last, if you were to say the list of things that are the least likely for my life career, this would have been one of them. But during my time at NASA, I had sort of the government researcher perspective. I was in microgravity material science, so I did biophysics and and material science. Did a lot of weightless flights, but at that time in the 80s and 90s, my buddies from school and whatever and through career, we were all looking at opening up the space frontier, and there's a big overlap in the community. This is Peter Diamandis. Some may have heard of him, or Byron Lichtenberg, who, when we started the X Prize in 1995, also Burt Rutan is known in the aviation circles. But there's a big overlap between the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, and the sort of the pioneering spirit we were trying to kindle with space. And we really wanted a sort of an exothermic economic reaction in space. We wanted something. We all know how expensive planes are, and rockets were just orders of magnitude more expensive. And our goal was that if we could create a private interest, if we create a reason to go to space outside of just government research, the competition would come in just like it had done in aviation, and that eventually there would be, lots of different things. Today, I mean, it's just a dream to watch Elon Musk, land rockets and land his first stage back, and Jeff Bezos is in the game, and Richard Branson. And so it really came out in many ways like we did. But when I left NASA, in that 15 years I was there, when I left there to sort of be an entrepreneur so I could, make enough money to actually buy one of these expensive space flights, I got sucked into the same thing everybody does in their 30s and 40s, lots of business dinners, lots of travel, lots of expense accounts. And, over the next decade or so, I ballooned up to 200, probably as high as 250, but certainly I documented my weight loss from 230 down. I became type 2 diabetic. And on the aviation front, one of the things that was sort of interesting is that when I left NASA, I was flying at the local Redstone Arsenal Field here in Huntsville, Alabama, and I basically was doing my training, all my flight training there. I soloed. I did my first cross countries. I was really ready to sit for my exam and go take my pilot's license. I was building a Cozy Mark IV in my garage, so I was starting into the aircraft side. And when I went out into the private world and I got all these loans with the bank covenants requiring a key man policy, our insurance came back and said, after I'd left NASA, after I had all the loans, after I had a company with 3 kids, the insurance companies came back and said, hey, look, if you continue to fly, if you go get your pilot's license at this point, we're going to drop your key man policy. So I got grounded. And this was after having waited to the right time in my life, because when I got my pilot's license, I really wanted to focus and not be someone half-assing it. I'd really had lots of time. I was doing that, and suddenly I was grounded. So, my Cozy project went, on hold, and I had to sort of witness from the side. And many of you guys today are somewhat facing a similar situation, but it's not as dire as what my outcome is that your most likely reason you're going to be grounded right now is probably because of a medical. And so to jump back on my story again, I ended up in a situation where I was diabetic. I had high cholesterol. I was having, glucose problems. I was having, reactive hypoglycemia. I was passing out after meals. I mean, I was really sick by around 2008. And so I had sold out my business to my business partners. I was on my own, and I said, I really need to figure this out. I want to be healthy again. And it sent me on a journey for the last decade, and has consumed me. And I'm going to present some things today that talk a little bit about what Jim and Pierre and James, the rest of these guys have been talking about on your forum, on your onlines. I want to give you a different perspective. I don't come from my diet based on animal rights. It's not anything into what I do. I'm only about the health. I'm only about health. And I want to talk a little bit about how our research has sort of drifted and how our language about food is drifted. So let me go ahead and share a screen here so I can, you guys need to let me know when you can actually see that. You guys see that screen? I don't hear anybody, so I guess you guys are muted.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I had it muted. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
You're good.
Great, that's fine. So you guys can see okay?
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about something called, I'm going to talk about longevity and give a specific definition of what I'm talking. We're going to be a more specific definition of health span, and something called a food triangle, which is a paradigm my research partners and I came up to sort of talk about how food and optimal health might overlap. And so, as a foundation, just a little background statistics, according to the World Health Organization, in 2015, 1.9 billion adults worldwide were overweight and 462 million were underweight. And, more than 600 million were obese. And so, when we look at this idea that on that side, of course, there are children that are wasted, but still, we also now have children that are 42 million that are under the age of 5 that are overweight and obese. So what we're seeing is a transitioning of our health and of our ability, because our access to food has just become so great. I mean, we are really suffering from our own success in some sense. And how that then translates down to the individual is this. This is actually chronic overnutrition. This is the idea of being in the chronically fed state all the time. But if you look at this obesity and diabetes number, when you look at this, this is 3,000 counties across the United States. And the chart, the one is the wealthiest quintile all the way to 5, which is the poorest quintile. And you can see that the obesity rate tracks from wealthy to poor, that diabetes tracks from wealthy to poor, that sedentary tracks also from wealthy to poor. But what the biggest thing to think about is that for the first time in human history, obesity is a symptom of poverty. Now, this is just completely upside down in sort of our evolutionary background. And when people discuss evolutionary diet, they don't think of it this way. And, we're now exporting this trend in the world. Jim mentioned earlier that we were teaching in Thailand. And what we've seen is that what it took 50 years the United States to do, India got there in 30 years, China got there in 20 years, and now Thailand's on track to get there in 10, and it's just amazing when we look at this and see that, all these grandparents now in Thailand are all being diagnosed with diabetes. And of course they want to blame the rice, but they've been eating rice forever. So what's responsible for this uptick? Well, what we've been talking about the health benefits of a plant-based diet, I think are really clear. Lower BMI, lower overall mortality, lower mortality for ischemic heart disease, reduced medication requirements, sustainable weight management, reduced incidence of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, hyperglycemia, reduced risks of cancer, especially colorectal, reduced obesity inflammatory markers, reversal of advanced coronary artery disease, and reversal of type 2 diabetes. Now, if you look at that list, one or more of those things will get you grounded. You will eventually be grounded for one or more of those things. Absolutely. Now you'll be able to, play the game where you hire the doctor to put your package in and kick the can down the road another 2 years. But eventually he's not going to be able to monkey with your biomarkers. Eventually he's not going to be able to out-medicate where he's just treating a symptom. He's bringing biomarkers in line through forcing it. And, in Alabama, we say it in a real technical way. It's like chasing a bubble in a bumper sticker. Eventually, you're going to run out of options. And so one of the things I want you to think about today is that by making a change in diet, by making a change in your food, that most of you in less than 3 months can completely reverse the things that will most likely ground you. So in order to do that, I want to talk about health span, because I'm not talking about sitting around and eating carrots and being immortal. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is we're not obsessed with physique. You got so many people out there that are athletes, and they want to run faster, and they want to compete, or they want to be in bodybuilding competitions, or they want to be, fitness models. Look, all those are great things. But for those of us that like to just poke holes in the sky and want to be in the cockpit, the bottom line is most of us really don't care that much about those things. I've been to plenty of fly-ins, and I know the food that's there on Saturday morning, and it generally isn't at the top of what I would call amazing gourmet. We really want to just get together, and getting together to eat is just an excuse to get together. You guys have an additional excuse, which is you want to fly. It's an excuse to fly. And I think what's really neat about that is that should be enough. But again, sharing a swallow seems to be this thing that, we can't escape. But when we're talking about health spans, we're not talking about that perfect physique. We're not talking about perfect diet. We don't talk about cheat days, because we permanently change the way people eat. We do think people need to have an adequate lifestyle. I don't think anybody argues that. They need to have adequate sleep. We all know that. But we are talking about meals that are derived primarily from vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. And so this is how health span looks visually. So if you can see, on the left, you're born, you get to about 15, you go through this reproductive prime, somewhere around 45 or 50, you're done having children. And then we start seeing this slow decline. My decline started happening in my early 30s. You can see that little blue line. And it was very rapidly approaching a grounded situation. And when I was talking about grounded, I'm talking about, 6 feet under, not just not flying, right? What health span aims to do is extend the period of life spent in good health, free from chronic disease and the disabilities of aging. So if someone says, if you're going to eat this diet and you're going to live on average 3 extra years, who wants to live 3 extra years in a nursing home? That doesn't matter. So someone doesn't really care if they're going to live 78.6 years or 78.7 years. But we want to look at this idea that for many years, for the last 20, 30, 40 years of your life, when you have the most wisdom, when you have the most financial resources, when you have the most time, we want those years to be as healthful as possible. And what I'm suggesting today, and Juliana Hever, who was with me as my partner in all this stuff, and then Jim will tell you, and Pierre and the other people that you've heard from, look, the bottom line here is this is very easy to achieve with food. And so let's look at this a little closer, because we've heard about this. We've heard about ancestral diets. Well, I'm eating with our ancestrals, and it's processed food, and it's protein, carbs, and fat. People bring up all of these words really to confuse and obfuscate. I don't think they do it intentionally. They learn it this way. But let's just break down food a little bit different and say you can eat almost anything for 15 years and make it to reproductive age. I mean, we do not have a world population problem. And there's a wide range of people eating really unhealthy food. And you can probably eat about anything and make it through those 15 to 20 years of reproductive prime. And then if we're talking about evolution, let's just add another 15 years there to say you've raised your youngest offspring. Sometime around 45 or 50, evolution is done with you. So all these people talking about ancestral diet, that's great until 45 to 50. But what is going to mitigate the chronic disease after reproductive prime is over? And this is when you're going to get grounded. You didn't get grounded eating cheeseburgers when you were 20, flying around and stopping and all the kinds of FBO food and crap that we the snacks and the stuff that we do just for the hell of it. The question is, what should we eat if we want to radically extend that health span portion of life? And that's what I'm talking about. So to maybe give this another underpinning, we need to discuss what is aging, because it's a confusing subject, and all of the literature on how we're really making progress on slowing aging and I think eventually age reversal, all of that research requires that you think about food, think about nutrition, think about all these things in kind of a fundamentally different way. There's trade-offs, and there's trade-offs between living long and reproducing. And so I use this little mnemonic. Juliana hates seeing this. I have one of these on my refrigerator. And what this is 960 boxes. It's 32 by 30 across the bottom if you want to build your own. But basically, each box represents 1 month of that approximately 80 years you're going to live. Okay? And if you sit down and create this with some graph paper and make a little thing with 960 boxes, and you fill all those in to your age that you are right now, and I'm 54, you're going to find that you don't have many boxes left. You don't have many boxes left. And I'm going to tell you that I do this with people all over the world that make transformations, whether we talked about earlier, Penn Jillette losing his 100 pounds, Cory Booker recently came to me to get ready for a presidential run, Kevin Smith, the comedian, came when he had his heart attack. It takes about 3 or 4 of those boxes to totally change your health and to totally change your habit. At the max, it's going to be about 12 of them, meaning for about a year in terms of the habits. But what I want you to see there in terms of aging is that what health span is about is not adding 4 more boxes at the end. What health span is centered on is those boxes that you're looking at that I have left, where I can remain agile and mobile, clear thinking, I can look youthful. So those are the things that we really want to focus on. And I don't think we talk about aging quite this way. I think we just put it off. And it's something that really needs to change. So there's several models of aging. This is a little technical and geeky, but I know that there's a lot of physicians that fly planes. So I'd like to be able to speak to some of you out there so you think about it. But the idea of one model of aging was that we're accumulating mutations, that our genes are just sort of getting scrambled over time, and they're all going to be scrambled, and eventually we're not going to be able to do anything about it, and that's why we die. And good news is that's probably not exactly what it is. Another one was put forth around the same time, antagonistic pleiotropy, which basically says that some of our genes might have sort of competing benefits. Earlier in life, they may be beneficial, and then later in life, they become detrimental. And that these genes offer these benefits at life, but at a cost later, something we talk about. And when I was referring earlier to saying that, in some cases, maybe working out, looking great, being able to win the race now isn't the best thing, for example, for your joints or other things later in life. I'm not saying exercise is bad. I'm just saying that these are trade-offs that we need to think about, because you have to feed and fuel yourself in a certain way to be competitive. And those competitions may be better for fecundity or reproduction and not so good for longevity or health span. And there's also this idea of this disposable soma, which sort of goes on that the body sort of budgets the amount of energy available to it. And then so food is somewhat competitive between metabolism, reproduction, and repair. Meaning, if you're in the chronically fed state and your body's constantly worrying about what to do with the last thing you swallowed, it's not taking as much time to do other kinds of repair needs that you do it. Or if your body is constantly looking at being in reproductive prime, meaning spread your genes, that may be preserving you later, is something that's not looking at. So in some sense, if you can think of it in an oversimplistic way, during times of restriction, it may be that our body preserves us for a future time when it's better to reproduce. And we might be able to hijack that a little bit to our favor. So that brings up this idea of something called senescence, and there's a lot of definitions of aging, but one narrow definition of aging is that of senescence, and it refers to age-related changes in an organism that negatively affect its vitality and function. So these happen at the cellular level, these happen to your organs. So for example, you might see like a leaf that's programmed to die in a certain time, which actually helps it because during the winter, those leaves collect ice and rip off, limbs. And of course, there are other leaves that are optimized to shed the snow. A mouse ages over a certain course of time. We even know that worms age and that. So we find that there's all these mechanisms, underlying mechanisms that govern aging, and they're partially conserved. And what that means is that when we look at organisms as diverse as yeast and mice and worms and humans, we see very similar patterns. And what they look like is that we see these patterns of life that look very similar. So for example, a yeast mother cell can generate a daughter cell every 90 minutes. But then they begin to lose and they're reproducing by the second day of their lives, and they begin to die during the third day. A female mouse, can reproduce about every 25 days. But then the yield of her eggs and of her success by about 12 months start to begin dying off, and around 18 months they're not able to reproduce. So age isn't just a collection of a collection of diseases, although most major diseases are associated with aging. And the really beautiful thing that's really in the last 5 to 7 years that we've learned is that really these changes we see are epigenetic, meaning our chromosomes, they're blueprints for our lives, that they get selectively modified. A part of that gene gets unraveled and used for something. Think about it. Every cell in your body has the blueprints for every other cell in your body. How do your retina cells know not to be liver cells and vice versa? And of course, even in cancers, we see this. We see that sometimes you end up finding a liver cell in the brain. I'm being very generic about this, so I'm not trying to be exacting for those of you that are oncologists and in this, but I'm just trying to talk about it in a general sense so everybody in the audience can get an idea. So the question then becomes, can we do something about this? And the answer is yes. what we have found out in laboratory experiments is by restricting the diets and restricting the nutrition of these organisms, no matter what they are, that they suddenly have these cleanup programs, and these cleanup programs can help. And so what's really amazing is by just simply reducing the diet, without malnutrition by 30-40%, lifespan increases 30 to 50% longer. And so, eventually, I believe we'll have, and I think there's right now in clinical trials, drugs that will do this, that we will have a pharmacological portion of this. Again, I'm not suggesting that eating carrots alone is going to do this. What I am suggesting is that it's possible that eating a diet like what Jim, Pierre, the rest of us have been discussing this morning and yesterday, that diet could mimic exactly what we see in the laboratory with other organisms. And so, sort of to bring this home a little bit, in 1989, researchers started at NIH, started with 30 rhesus macaques. And they have an average lifespan of about 27 years, a maximum lifespan about 40. It's not too different from human, if you would say around 80 and 120 years, right? So the average person lives around 80. We've got people that live around 115, 120. It's kind of the max. They're 27 and 40. So if you put that on the timeline and, use the old, dog years versus human years, this is what a rhesus macaque looks like at 27 and a half years. And they actually live longer in captivity than in the wild because of disease, because of sanitation, because of food availability. So it turns out that we actually can better study them in captivity than we can in the wild. So it's not because they have a poor diet. This is a normal, healthy diet, and this is a rhesus macaque that aged very well to 27.5 years. He looks 80. Look at the second picture. He's got sarcopenia. You see his muscles there. His fur is starting to, hair is all falling out and grayed. His eyes are kind of cloudy. You look at that look. This is the exact same monkey from the exact same time period. The exact same. The only difference is 30% less monkey chow. And even if their monkey chow wasn't perfect, meaning there'll be some people out there that look at these studies and say, oh my gosh, their food was this, their food was that. The truth is that even just 30% less monkey chow, that's what the difference is. Look at the muscular mass on that, on picture D there. Look at the fur coat on these animals. Look at what they look like. That looks easily 10 or 15 years younger. And so we're seeing that even in primates, which are our first cousins, we share a ton of genes with these rhesus macaques. We see this, and so when we look at this, when we look at what we have here, we're talking about 70% of the dietary restricted monkeys versus 25 of the normal fed monkeys without chronic disease, meaning by just simply eating 30% monkey chow, by the time they hit their 30s, or for us it would be our 70s or 80s, 70% of them didn't have chronic disease. Only 25 that ate a normal healthy monkey chow, and we don't have a study that ate a Western diet, drive-through monkey chow or diet that we would do. So I want to look at that. When we look at, for example, neoplasia, which is cancer, cardiovascular disease, glucoregulatory disease. In other words, each time they had, some diagnosis of this, 6 events versus 28 events over 33 years, just by 30% less monkey chow. And, I know somewhere out there is probably somebody is going to just want to sell the monkey chow. This is what the food industry does. Oh, it's the monkey chow. No, it's not. It's the dietary restriction without malnutrition. And so when a group of leading scientists got together in HealthSpan Research in 2015, they came up with a list of 6 things that they could target for pharmacological intervention, meaning things that they could use to try to trick the body with a drug to do things. And I'm all for this. If we could find a way to do this and you could eat anything you want, I'd be all for it. But right now we can't do that. One of them was inhibition of growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor 1 axis. I'm not going to get into all the details of this. Another one was protein restriction and fasting mimicking diets. We're hearing a lot of this online now. Lots of people are talking about diets and fasting. I've spent up to 24 days with no food, just water, doing research for my book. And so there's a lot of things that here are positive. The inhibition of TOR and S6K pathway, I'll talk a little bit about this. The sirtuin proteins, inhibition of inflammation, and then chronic metformin use. I'll also hit on that, but basically metformin, if it weren't indicated as a diabetes drug, it turns out to be a very powerful modulator for the sirtuin protein. So I'll talk a little bit about this. But basically, protein restriction or selective amino acid restriction seems to be a big part of this. And, we've got all these people pushing for protein, and yet restricting protein or restricting these amino acids has been something that's worked almost universally. So there are these sirtuins, these genes, and again, this is for the physician side of you guys, so you can start looking into this. If you don't get this part, it doesn't have to be part of what we're doing overall. But the sirtuins is a family of 7 proteins that may control aging at a cellular level. And how do we know? Well, when scientists can shut down or modify these genes that produce these sirtuin proteins, and then they restrict the diet, it no longer works. So what I'm saying is we can't do it with things like primates because they live so long. So you can't test it. But with a mouse that is very, very short-lived, we can change that gene in the mouse, delete the gene, and we're able to do that. But what's also interesting is, that David Sinclair, who's one of my collaborators on some of the papers, I'll show you some of this that are coming up, he has been able to actually reverse this in some cases. In other words, turn these genes back on through certain sirtuin activating compounds. And it's gotten a lot more complicated, but the long story short is that we actually have been able to reverse aging in cells and in organisms in the lab. And that's promising for the future. But how does this apply to us today? Is there something we can take home from that? And so in 2014, David, myself, and another guy, Andrew Bremer, who's at NIH, endocrinologist, we wrote a paper called the Metabolic Winter Hypothesis. And what this paper talks about is that a lot of the genes and a lot of the protein expression, right down to the cellular level, down to the cellular building blocks, that these genes were basically modified by dietary restriction, but also by mild cold stress. And so what we wrote in this paper is how it may be that in some sense, that time, that winter, that metabolic winter, when we were cool and food was limited, that the body was doing some preservation things that actually were beneficial. And that the fact that we see this in a wide range of organisms. We can cycle temperature on yeast cells and see an impact. We can cycle nutrition and see an impact. So it's not just humans, but it's everyone. And so we wrote this paper which sort of outlines the more detailed. I'll have some links, these bit.ly links at the end that you guys who want to see this, they can, or maybe they can put it in the description. But these genes very well could be part of this. And this doesn't mean taking ice baths. This is the way my stuff was all popularized. It all became ice baths and extreme, just like fasting has become extreme. But the point is that just a little bit more. But one of the things we observe at the end is that obesity and chronic disease are seen most often in people and the animals, pets, that we keep warm and overnourished. Similar to the circadian cycle, like most of the living organs, it's reasonable to believe we also respond to the seasons and carry with us the survival genes for winter. And maybe our problem is winter never comes. We're a society of one meal that takes breaks to sleep and work. If we look at the last inch of a 7 million year evolutionary mile, we've changed this. We don't have to live and ever experience cold. We have the same temperature room in the winter, the summer, the planes, the trains, the cars, the houses. Food is always available, doesn't matter where you are, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. You can get all foods all the time. And so if you think about it, if you believe that the organisms in your backyard respond to the seasons, they don't have Apple Watches and iCow. They don't have outlook. They respond to temperature, light, and food availability. That's it. That's the seasonal cues. And so when you look at it, it's probably unreasonable to think that humans, in the last 100 years of mastering those three things through engineering and agricultural prowess, it's probably unreasonable to think that we lost our ability to sense those seasons. I'm not talking about eating the food of the season, like this fruit's in and that fruit's out. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that having a time of your life when you're overfed and underfed, and the fact that these seasonal things, all of the light that's in your life, all of the food that's in your life, all of the warmth, the light, that temperature, that food availability, those dominate what they are. And so one of the things we proposed was to get rid of these things called protein, carbs, and fat. And I'm going to use this because these three words are actually going to end up confusing you. These three words, protein, carbs, and fat, are probably one of the biggest reasons why food marketers are able to do what they do. Now, they're not evil. They just want to sell food. But when you start seeing these three words, protein, carbs, and fat, on the front of packaging, just ignore it. Just know someone's trying to sell you. They're trying to make you look the other way. What we proposed in our paper is to use this new thing called the food triangle. Now, looking at the food triangle, at the top are leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, stems such as asparagus or celery, bulbs, garlic, onions, etc., mushrooms. Down one descending side are energy sources of foods from plant foods. Down the other descending side are energy sources of foods from animal foods. Now, we haven't just vilified any foods. We're not calling them carbs. We're not calling them anything. And I won't go into what we call macro confusion, but if you look online, you'll find some of that, and I'll have some papers that you can look at. But the idea here is that we're able to look at food in a fundamentally different way, and I'll show you how that works. So I'll give these at the end, but we have a series of 4 papers that really outline this. Also for physicians or for people going to your physicians, myself, Juliana Hever, we have 2 papers that actually are very specifically targeted for the healthcare industry. And specifically for a healthcare professional, this will help you with your patients. If you're working with your doctor and you want to do what we're all suggesting and implement this plant-based diet, it will actually help them understand better, because they will not learn this in school. Nobody teaches this in school. It's just not there. But let's return back to why this food triangle works so well. Because, we've all heard of like paleo or keto diets. We talk about the Western diet. Sometimes people call it the SAD diet, or maybe a vegan diet. If you look very carefully on this graph on the left, what you'll see is that, if you eat down the left side, if blue dots represent the diet emphasis, if you're eating mostly all those leafy greens, you're cutting out fruits and starchy vegetables and rice and grains and those things, and you're eating, over here, some people will cut out dairy, others will cut out red meat, but maybe you're eating, some salmon or something, but you're eating primarily on the left side. And you see that you've seen your friend do this, and you see they've had success. They've lost some weight. Well, the reason they've lost some weight is because they aren't really eating together with these other foods. And I'll tell you why that's important. On the other hand, you can see vegans. There's not tons of fat vegans, but they're out there. But vegans tend to have the lowest BMI when surveyed until the advent of junk food, which is a whole different thing. But the point is, they eat down the sort of the right side of this. They're basically they're excluding the animal products. They're eating the plant foods on the right side. Now, Western diet is what I would call bottom feeding. And what you're doing in a Western diet is you're eating the most energy-dense portions of the food. So think about it: steak and potatoes, burgers and fries, pasta and meat sauce, curry and rice. You're bottom feeding across the bottom, which means you're eating something that when food was economically or environmentally limited, it's the best way to get food in. But when food is abundant, it's the best way to be overnourished. And then on top of that, we all know that excess refined sugar, salt, oil, and flours falls into all of these diets. So you could be paleo and still have problems. You could be vegan and still have issues. And of course, the Western diet, we all see the results there. Now, what's happened is instead of having common sense foods like saying, I need to eat broccoli, I need to eat carrots, we make the message really, really, really complicated. What we're suggesting today is that if you'll just eat right, eat to the right of the food triangle, you'll find that a lot of those issues that will potentially ground you as a pilot will probably go away. And so I've spent the last 10 years of my life doing crazy stuff to my body. I mean, fasting for over 70 days, 70, maybe 90 at this point in total, but the longest one was around 24. I have a metabolic lab in my home. I have a midlife crisis calorimeter, a couple of them. I've brought scientists in here. I've brought people in here. I've coached hundreds of clients, measured metabolism thousands of times. Nobody's ever broken. My kids, unfortunately, were a big part of my guinea pigs while they were still home. They all ended up doing some sort of science fair project. So Dad had some cool toys in the garage, so they did that. But the point is that I tried to understand what was going on because I was a scientist. I was working in protein chemistry. I was working in biophysics, and I was fat and sick, and I didn't get it. And I can tell you, there are those of you out there that are physicians. You went through med school, you went through residency, you're treating clients every day, and you're fat and you're sick. And I'm not saying that in a shaming way. I'm saying it in a way that you don't want to be this way. And clearly, if you understood it as well as you think you understood it, you wouldn't choose that. Certainly, no pilot would choose to be grounded for medical reasons. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. And, if you happen to be a Burt Rutan that gets grounded and you have an aviation company, you got all these people, you can get up and take the stick anytime you want. But if you're a pilot in command in your home and it's your Cirrus that you dreamed of owning and you've now got this thing and you want to fly it and go punch holes in the skies and go on some vacations, go on some trips here and there or whatever, the fact of the matter is if you get grounded, that investment, that dream, is likely, unless your children are flying now, it's gone. It's over. You're not going to get to be able to do it, and you're not going to be able to justify all the annuals. You're not going to be justify the hangar costs. You're not going to be justify all those things. And this is so easy to take care of. But I did these crazy things. I want to talk about metabolism because everybody is going to talk about being broken, being metabolism, but I am talking to pilots, so I thought, hey, I want to bring in some rocket science in here to make it fun. But basically, Metabolism 101 is just like Engine 101. We need a fuel. We need an oxidizer. Space Shuttle main engine, when it was still going, used oxidizer was liquid oxygen. Fuel was liquid hydrogen. What came out the exhaust? Water and lots of heat. By the same token, in your body, every cell in your body has a mitochondrion, and it has many mitochondria in fat. And then fat and carbohydrates can be fuels and substrates for this little power plant using oxygen as oxidizer, and it produces CO2, carbon dioxide, water, and heat. And what's really neat about this is that if we actually measure the CO2 in and out of your mouth and the oxygen in and out of your mouth, this is a stoichiometric equation. It's just like doing a mixture on fuel on your engine. If we know what's going in and we know what's coming out, we can tell which fuel you're burning. They're like a thumbprint because a different amount of oxygen is needed to burn fat than carbohydrate. And it turns out protein is in exactly the middle. That's why it's not up here. And so it will change the magnitude, but it won't change the direction of the needle. So, this is Dr. Michael Clapper when I was out doing my mat fasts, or some of the other people that I've worked with measuring metabolism. And this is what that chart looks like. You can sit them down for 15 minutes and do this thing, and you're going to get this resting metabolism rate. His resting metabolism rate was 1893. It was predicted to be 1715. Nobody has broken metabolisms. He's normally burning around 49.4% fat and 51.1% carbohydrate. No surprise, about 50-50. That's a normal person. That's what they would look like if we measure them and they're just eating normally and they're healthy. He's thin, he's not overweight. If we look at this again and someone's dieting, this is Juliana Hever, and when I first met her, we went through and she lost 12 pounds over about 18 days. And then we measured her metabolism at the close of that. Now, once again, Her predicted metabolism was 1278. So her radical diet of losing 12 pounds in 18 days did not shut her metabolism down, because measured it was 1378, very close to her predicted, a little bit above, but again, that's error. But look what she's doing. Because she's been dieting, she's burning 77.5% fat and 23.1% carbohydrate at the bottom. Her dieting mode, her body goes into a mode where it preferentially uses fat. And this should make sense to everybody. You do not need to eat the fat storage organ or the energy storage organ of another plant or animal to burn your own. This idea that starvation mode and that you're going to starve yourself and then your metabolism's going to break and then that's what's going on, all nonsense. It's just nonsense. There are some true parts about shifts that do happen, but they are rounding error compared to what you put on the end of a spoon. And so starvation mode, really, this is what it looks like. I was eating starchy meals for a couple weeks, doing DEXA scans, doing 80 biomarkers. I did a nutritarian diet, which is basically leafy greens and nut dressings, etc. And then I did 2 weeks of water fast. Now, this was what my metabolic rate did. You can see the slide down at the bottom. It varied from left to right. It sloped. This is what the prediction in the Harris-Benedict equation predicts from 1919, when they were measuring, when metabolism was cutting-edge science, and everybody seemed to understand it. Not today, when it's been so distilled and a part of a telephone game that nobody really talks about it in the right way. And if you look at the slope here, magically you'll see that it matches exactly what's happened. Your metabolism scales mostly with your weight. The bigger you are, the higher it is. The lower you are, the lower it is. Males are normally higher than females, but even that crosses over if you weigh less. This is what really happened over that 6 weeks. As my body was more and more restricted in food, it burned an increasing percentage of fat every day. Now, doesn't that make sense? Doesn't it make sense that we have our fat storage organ to burn fat for times of no food? Those organisms that burned their brain cells and their organ and wasted away their muscle in times of no food probably didn't jump into the gene pool with the same vigor as our real ancestors that burned fat, because that's what it's there for. So the fact of the matter is that I want you to understand that this idea of this wasting away, there's some true things, but there's twists. And what's the problem is everybody summarizes things and then they leave out a lot of the details that matter. So we look at something like this. I measured, how much does activity play in? Is this an exercise? Is this really that we're sedentary, that we're not moving? And so I went to the downtown Westin. I snuck into the basement with my $40,000 backpack calorimeter, all calibrated. I got down there. I stayed in the basement you can go out at any floor. I rested for a while until I reached my regular rested metabolic rate. And then I proceeded to climb 73 floors of stairs over the next 20 minutes, 720 feet. And the question is, how many Oreo cookies did it take to get to the top of the tallest hotel? I think it's the second tallest hotel in the United States, but it's certainly the tallest one in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta. And by the way, the door was locked when I got to the top floor. So I actually had to go down like 10 floors before I could get an open floor, which kind of sucked. But anyway, how many cookies did it took? It took 3 1/8. It took around 60 calories to get to the top. Now, you think you can go out there and run, and this is going to be, mitigating all that swallowing. Well, it's really not. And this is why a whole food plant-based diet works out so well. And so what I mean by that is that we're talking about eating vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. And until this new diet is equally convenient, familiar, and enjoyable, you don't have a choice. One or more of those will dominate your plate. All food is habit. And so what we do is we eat these foods so that we can eat a large volume of food that's feels good, that's tasty, that's enjoyable. Yes, it's different, but all food is habit. If you travel the world, you guys know people eat weird things all over the world, and not all those weird things are necessarily equally healthy. And what I'm suggesting here is that less may be more with nutrition. And a whole food plant-based diet may be the most efficient and enjoyable way to implement the laboratory lessons we got from Lifespan. So where I'm going with this is saying that this is going to be weird for a while. This is going to be, it may even be restrictive for a while. People might say, oh, but I'm going to give up this or I'm going to give up that. The question for you guys is, do you want to give up flying or cheeseburgers? Like those silly hot dogs that I can't tell you how many times I had at the local fly-in, or the really bad biscuits and Sam's and Costco, sausage patties or whatever that we would have at these fly-ins when I was still able to go there more often. I still need to. Hopefully this is my entree with you guys, but they aren't nearly as good as the food I eat today. And when I talk about this is coming up with the new book that Juliana and I are writing called The Health Span Solution. Look at all the food we can do. I mean, there are all kinds of fruits and all kinds of, watermelon tomato salads and Brunswick stew and chilies and soups and, beans and fruit, all kinds of food, falafels. There's so many different kinds of foods that we can create. And I decided to go back to culinary school in 2016 to take what I've learned in science and actually bring it to the plate. How could we redefine the plate to eat the kinds of things we need to do so that we could actually implement what we see? This is 30% less monkey chow, but I'm telling you, this food tastes a lot better than monkey chow. And so, sort of to bring this to the end, if you guys want to take the time to write down these bit.ly links, they're case sensitive, so the capitals matter, but plant-based nutrition, bit.ly geriatric PBN-PDF, bit.ly/winter never comes, and bit.ly oxidative priority. Those 4 papers will talk about what Juliana and the rest of my colleagues are doing in terms of our research. It'll tell you how we've implemented this stuff mostly and how we've made it work. And it'll give you some technical idea. This is, I know this is the more geeky, nerdy part, but it's something you guys want to do. And then with that, I'm going to say, thank you guys. We're going to have the HealthSpan solution coming out in December 2019. If you want to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, it's just my name, Ray Cronice. Juliana Hever is Juliana Hever, plant dietitian. I can give you those as well. And so with that, I'll end this part of it, and we can bring me back live and see about answering any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Ray. That was incredibly detailed for sure, and very interesting. I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak several times and actually get to spend some time talking with you through some of this, and it's incredible stuff. It's really common sense when you think about it, right? When you look at the longest lived populations, one of the most common things they've had is calorie restriction, right? Lean body mass is one of the greatest predictors of longevity of anything. So we'll share the links when we share the video. We'll go ahead and share the links in the post. I'm not sure if I'm not seeing any questions pop up here. Are you on with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my summary over here is Ray took us from rockets to recipes.
There you go. Can I have that one, Pierre?
It's all yours, baby.
I love it, man. That goes right there with late list of weight loss. So rocket science to recipes. I love it.
And I do want to point out, Ray and Juliana do work with clients. It's by referral only. Ray is very passionate about what he does. Juliana, they're both very passionate, and they only want to work with people that are committed to it, right? So I think Ray and Juliana are in a position where they get to pick and choose their clients, right? And if you're really into it and you're really going to stick to the plan, let's work together. But they're not going to waste their time kind of just churning through clients that are going to half-ass it. So I did turn.
We try to be a lighthouse, not a tugboat. I can't convince you to do it. So if you need me to talk you into this or whatever, it's not something. But the most important thing, is I think as a discussion that we have to think about is, I'm just telling you, as a guy who got grounded not really. I mean, obviously I was at fault, but I just couldn't have predicted exactly the sequence of events that got me there. I missed out on so much. I mean, after going to, I was going to Oshkosh every year with NASA paying the bill and putting up the hotel and didn't have to worry about that. Had, golf carts to drive around and talk to, 50, 60,000 people, coming through our event things. It was amazing. It was amazing to walk around and do all that stuff. And, just sitting on the sidelines wasn't enough. I really wanted to finish, and, I just simply couldn't do it. And I just can't imagine, knowing what I know today, that a person would chance getting grounded over food that they've eaten 1,000 times or tens of thousands of times before. They just don't. It just isn't that big a deal.
Right.
And Jim, one of the things that and I think Pierre, as we talked about it, all of us talked about it yesterday or Friday, was, at some point this becomes, because food is habit, at some point this becomes your new normal.
Right.
And you're not deprived. It's just like someone saying they're a smoker and they're going to quit. And quitting means the rest of their life they're going to be deprived of cigarettes. Well, I've never been a smoker. I've never felt deprived because it just doesn't matter. And the same thing goes right now, for example, with cheese. Yeah, I could eat cheese, but it doesn't have its appeal that it once did. Right. And I would have never predicted that. I was doing this very selfishly for health, but as more time went on, those things became less and less appealing.
Well, and I think Penn Jillette says it the best, right? I can eat everything I want. I just don't happen to want to eat that. And I kind of say the same thing. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to crave pixie sticks. Guess what? I don't crave them anymore. I don't.
That's a great example.
I don't miss eggs. I don't miss seafood. I nourish myself, right? When I eat, I think about, I'm not eating, I'm nourishing, and I feel good about that, mentally and physically. But I will say, I want to point out, as a personal favor, because I know you only do work by referrals, I connected you with one of my clients, highly successful businessman, wildly successful in business, right? Horrible in health, which is actually pretty typical of the clients I work with. They're very successful type A personalities, but they just don't take good care of themselves. And I connected him with you and Juliana. And I mean, you talk about a metamorphosis. First of all, he's half the man he used to be.
January 3rd, since January 3rd, he's down 67.1 pounds.
Yeah, and his cholesterol is a fraction of what it was. I mean,
this is what his change looks like. It's like he went from happy to healthy.
Yes, and he is absolutely swearing that this is how he will live the rest of his life. He's
a hunter. He's a hunter. We talked about that.
This guy travels the world killing stuff. And
so this is not. I just want to emphasize, I'm not against vegans or what people have in terms of ideology, but I want them to recognize that what we're talking about, my motivations and what we're doing, is about human flourishing. I want humans to do very well. This isn't an animal thing. Certainly, I don't eat any more animals than Jim does, but that's not the point. I just want to make sure people know that, because a lot of people see it as bias. There are people that are motivated by that, and that's okay if that's their thing. My thing is I want to be healthy and happy, and I had to develop new habits. And like all of those things, it's the same thing with CRM. It's the same thing. In fact, one of the things that's going on when we look at these programs that help people, that they start to get their biomarkers start drifting out of place, and they start to get worthy because they're trying to put the package together, and they go to these doctors that package up and tell them how to present their stuff so they're not going to get their medical taken away. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to relate that to my first solo, because everybody remembers that first solo. You all know what I'm talking about. And I didn't know that day was going to be my first solo. It's like we're doing touch and goes, we're doing some stuff, and all of a sudden my instructor says, "Hey, go ahead and when we let it down, we just touched and go ahead and pull over here and let me out." I'm like, what? And my heart starts racing. You don't know if you can do it. So, I did everything just like it was, got in the pattern. Everything's fine. I come in. Well, the very first time I came in, I got into pilot-induced oscillation. And that first bobble happened. And that second bobble happened. And fortunately, because I had trained, I went full throttle and went around. Pucker factor was through the roof. But that's the only thing I could have done. It was the only solution I had, because at that moment, if I would have just tried it one more time, I'd have put the head, I might not have died, but I certainly would have wrecked the plane, wouldn't have flown again for sure. But the fact is, I didn't have any more choices. I was not going to land that, and I had to go around. And the fact of the matter is, many pilots right now in health, if you're over 50 and you're starting to have issues, you basically can do this with drugs. You can do a medically induced, oscillation, pilot-induced oscillation. You can do this, and eventually it's going to get you. Eventually it's going to ground you. There is absolutely no other choice but to change your diet in some way. And if you could find another diet that will succeed, that's great. I tried everything. Like I said, I did not come to this from an ideological perspective. If I could have done this on keto, if I could have done this on paleo, if I could have gotten the same results, I would have, but I couldn't. They didn't work. It didn't work. And I built a metabolic lab. I went to extremes just because it was interesting to me. I didn't have an airplane sucking me of cash, so that's where some of it went. But the point I'm making is I really want to implore you guys, because I share that passion, and I want to make sure that you recognize that you're not going to be able to game the system forever. And I hate to think that you guys would lose at this point. You already have a Sirius. I mean, that was my dream. It was just coming in 1999. It was the promise. It was that. It's everything, just like space was for me. And now you can go buy a ticket and soon we'll be able to fly. The Sirius was the first promise that was really coming out of the experimental aircraft, where we were making all these innovations because Cessna and everybody else wasn't doing it. And you guys have an amazing plane, amazing association. And I think it would suck to lose your medical over a hot dog. It just seems ridiculous to me, but
let alone your life, right?
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, their first sign that they had heart disease was their heart attack and death.
Yep, that's my stepfather. His symptom of heart disease was death. For around 45% of people who die of heart disease, that is the first symptom. Right. So yeah, it's absolutely, and it leaves behind people that are alone. And so the point here is, make the change, try it, but you got to do it for a while. Spend the 3, the 6, the 12 months so that you have enough time for the new normal to set in. When you meet the new girl or the guy, you can't see the old girlfriend or boyfriend on the weekends every now and then because it's, convenient. You're never going to develop your new relationship with a person still seeing the old one. But if you get into that new relationship and you develop the new habits and develop the new coping skills and develop those, then you can have something what Penn talks about as well, which is rare and appropriate. And rare and appropriate is about people and places, not time between events. It's not, I'm going to cheat every 7 days. I'm going to cheat every 2 weeks. No, it may be 2 days in a row. You may be in Thailand. You might decide to have some calamari, or you may decide to have whatever. But the point is that you can't do it every single day. If you do it every day, or if you do it every week, it's probably going to be too much. I'd say the best science, if I'm completely open in terms of the best science, says is about 8 to 10% of your diet, but we don't know what's worse. Like paleos give up dairy, so they give up cheese, or whatever. Other people give up, other kinds of food. So all I'm saying is that you just have to make those choices.
Excellent. Well, and so I think
we got a question at this end, if you're game.
Yep.
Sure.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Dr. Jim Benny. Try that one microphone.
Hey, Ray, that was just a fantastic presentation. I really appreciated it.
Thanks, Jim.
It was spot on.
Thank you.
Hey, my question to you is just kind of a longevity one, because I have a lot of patients that will start this and they fall off. Or what is your success rate long term with all the patients that have gone through your 84-day program?
Yeah, so obviously it's more than 84 days. 12 weeks is probably the entry level. So the success is going to mimic if they stay on a plant-based diet or they don't. What I would say is different about our program than most others is if you went to any one of my clients who succeeded, and all but a handful of hundreds of them have, and they had some recidivism. The difference between other programs and now is they know exactly what they did to fail. They know exactly what caused it. They know exactly what their habits are. So the reason I think we are more effective is we do spend a lot one-on-one time, and most importantly, we go through a very complex set of unwinding of social norms, because every social norm and almost every societal move is based on centered around food. And so one place I see vegans and vegetarians failing is they get into this diet and then they think they have to convert everybody they come in contact with. And that just turns people off, just like Amway. It's like, people just don't want to be converted. That's why I said be a lighthouse, not a tugboat. But I have many, 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 many clients. I mean, I have probably some couple hundred that, or maybe 100 more that I still see their weight every single day because they get on the scales. But if they continue to get on the scale and they continue to eat a whole food plant-based diet, not gaining weight and losing weight are two totally different strategies. So it's a lot easier not to gain weight than to lose if you're eating the way that we're all describing. And so I would say that I wish I had statistics. The next thing we're doing, we've got a company called Ephoros that we're doing, and one of the things we want to do with is to have an application that helps us track some of this stuff so that we can really focus in on collecting the kind of data that will help us improve and help people in the long term.
Ray, you're not going to believe
Fantastic.
this, but it's true. When you said be a lighthouse, not a tugboat, one of my dear friends is sitting here 5 feet from me, and he motioned me over, and he had a question for me. He said, what did he say about a tugboat? He was a career tugboat captain. And
there you go.
He didn't get, he was, wait, what? What's wrong with a tugboat?
Well, but he understands a different role. And let me just tell you, if you ask him, did he go out there and randomly hook up to ships and start pulling them places? He'll say, hell no. The only people he hooked up to were people that threw him a line. And he didn't go to them, they came to him. But with that lighthouse, when they're coming into those same channels, having that lighthouse that's marking the rite of passage when you're coming and making the final approach, has an important role too. It doesn't have all the roles. But what happened is that, when I tell people to be a lighthouse, not a tugboat, he would know better than anyone. He just can't go randomly hook up to any boat coming in the harbor because you think they're making a mistake and start tugging on them. Like, that's a good way to get shot. So I hope that helps.
Or get your neck broken. I don't know. I think there's a place for us preachy vegans.
In a forum.
With a lot of other preachy vegans. You guys all stay together and preach to each other.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ray. Again, I know you're incredibly busy. I know you're on a deadline. I know you guys are like 20 hours a day trying to meet the deadline and cranking out recipes and things like that. So to take your time out of your schedule to do this is amazing, and I want to thank you very, very much for the generosity.
Well, thank you, and I'm selfishly involved in here. I'm hoping that if I'm involved with all these serious operators, that somebody's going to be popping into the local either our Moontown grass field or also to Huntsville, and next year I'm gonna be flying out in somebody's Cirrus and do a real fun cross country, even though I missed out on the other opportunities. So I'm gonna be counting on you guys if we put another one of these together that I can be in person next time.
Well, three of the folks here yesterday were still in our Cirrus group because we're the best online pilot form, but 3 of them were Eclipse jet drivers. So, if you don't mind coming,
I'll take those too.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You can slum it.
All right.
I have like 5,000 parabolas under my belt. So
Nice.
Just
Nice.
dare them, double dog dare them.
that's right. You know, I can guide them through those little weightless flights, right?
Ray, thanks
All right.
so
Well,
much.
thank you very much. And again,
Thanks, guys.
we'll be posting this link to the forum and also to Pierre's YouTube account.
Yes, thank you very
Thanks,
much,
guys.
everybody. Ray, Jim.
Great.
Thanks.
Best
Have a
to
great
Juliana.
day.
Take care.
Thank you. All right, bye.
Make sure you hit.